Hi, my name is Hillary Jacobs Hendel, and this is part three of working with anger to release it in safe ways. Right, just a quick review. We all get angry. It's a core survival emotion that's designed to um, help us really defend ourselves. And it's a quite a primitive program that's very black and white. It wants to come up and protect ourselves by lashing out in some way, physically or verbally. And we can't stop anger from happening, but once it gets triggered and activates the body, which is what all core emotions do, we can certainly think about how we want to respond to it. But first, it really helps to release that energy, that initial energy of the anger. So, in part one, we did some deep belly breathing because that's the best tool that I know of to ride the full wave of a core emotion like anger, not to mention lower anxiety. And then in part two, we started to notice what anger feels like in the body and the impulse. And in this part three, we're going to use fantasy to release the impulse of the anger because it's very interesting. The brain does not know the difference between fantasy and reality in this particular way, which makes it very useful as a tool, an awareness tool for to work with emotions. In other words, there's research that if you think about running and imagine yourself running, it lights up some of the same areas of the brain as if you were actually running. So we're going to use fantasy. So if you bring up right now the the person or the situation that is bringing up anger, and we start to slow down and notice how in the body we feel that anger. In other words, what inside your body is telling your mind that you have anger. And once we can start to notice what's happening in the body, we can send our focus right to that area. So, usually, when I'm angry, I'll feel some energy coming up. I might feel my fists balling up. I might feel tension in my jaw that tells me that my body wants to say something. And so, I'm going to notice the anger in my body, right? And not really go into it, but just noticing, like, hey, as though it's a friend, an angry friend. Hey, what do you feel like doing? What's the impulse? And we want to listen to the body as we bring up the face of the person who angered us. And we want to see what that anger wants to do. And we have to trust our body. It's all in the impulse. So if we just slow down and stay with what's happening in the body, and I'm sorry I'm not looking at you because I'm focusing inward, and I want you to do the same. Just notice the physical sensation and just wait. And as you see the person who angered you, what is the impulse to take action towards that person? So let's say you want to really tell them off. You let the fantasy come from the feeling in the body, and it will as you practice this over and over again for the rest of your life. Now, I can very easily know that, I may want to just say, oh, how could you be so terrible, right? So I imagine actually saying that to the person, like they're right there, like it's a movie. And I see myself saying, you are so terrible, I can't stand you. And then I notice their face, and they've just heard, I can't stand you. You check into their face. What's the fantasy of what do you see in their face as you've said that? And it might be anything. They might get defiant. They might double down on their defensiveness. They might look very sad. They might look very guilty. They might look very ashamed. Whatever it is, you notice it. Then we check back in our body and to see, is there more anger now or less anger? So if in the fantasy the person sort of backs down, we may have gotten the anger off our chest, and now our anger might shift into something else like that's enough, or we might feel guilty, in which case we have to work with guilt. Um, Sometimes there's a physical impulse, right? And because we're using fantasy, nobody gets hurt. It's really great. So let's say I just want to punch someone in the nose, and I imagine doing that, right? We imagine doing it to discharge the energy of the anger. And lo and behold, we tend to feel more level headed, even more loving and kindly to the person who angered us, right? It's counterintuitive. Many of my clients and patients initially worry that if they indulge the fantasy of their anger, that it'll make them more apt to do something in real life. And it's really counterintuitive. We get it off our chest, we get it out of our body, we feel more relaxed, and then we can think through how to um, how to manage the situation better. Maybe we want to say something to the person who angered us. Maybe we don't even need to because we know this is old anger really directed at our parents, which is what happens in a lot of this work, that someone in the present triggers a past situation, and that anger from the past gets put on the person in the present. So that'll be part 4 about what to do with anger after we've discharged the energy. But coming back again, so we slow down to review by taking deep belly breaths. We bring up the situation that angers us. We dip into the body to see how anger presents itself in the body, whether it's energy or tension, and we want to notice the impulse. And then we want to give ourselves permission to imagine that impulse playing out with the other person in real life. Now, for people that have been hurt very badly by abusive people, their anger is going to be relatively large, right? And for just a little annoyance, the impulse is going to be smaller. But for people who are terribly abused, they may have murderous rage. They may have, it won't be enough even to like imagine murdering someone. They may have to torture them first because of all the ways that they have hurt you. So, whatever it is, to whatever degree, we can allow the fantasy to play out like a movie, noticing how the other person responds to our aggression, coming back into the body to see if the anger is more or less, and if it's more, really asking, what does my anger want to do now? Coming back, checking in, what does my anger do now? I see this expression on the person who angered me face. I check back in, and it's a repetitive process of creative trial and error until we get that anger out. Now, if the fantasy technique does not work for you, or you don't feel comfortable with it, you can write out unedited your anger, right? So you would take a piece of paper and just write out everything you want to say and do to the person with curses and all until you feel like you get it all out. And you'll feel a shift in your body that lets you know the anger is out and now something is in its wake, either relief or another emotion. So emotions are really predictable in the working with them in these ways. And there's a phenomenology, meaning when you release something, there's a shift. And then if you pay attention to that shift, there's another shift. And these shifts tend to be for the better pretty much all the time when you release emotion, and particularly anger, in this way. If you want to learn more, I encourage you to read or listen to It's Not Always Depression, where there's detailed stories. You'll be a fly on the wall in my therapy sessions to see how this is done. Plus, there's more exercises to try. And on my website, HillaryJacobsHendel.com, there's tons of free resources on all the emotions and on relationships and on trauma. Thank you for being here. Take good care. Working with emotions is a lifelong process, so be very good to yourself for doing this hard work. Bye-bye.